Thank you so much for joining us this morning live, finally. My name is Jessica Musk. I am a Barnard class of 1998. I see a bunch of us out here today. Woohoo. And I am chair of the Alma Maters Committee. Thank you for making the trip to campus. Today, we are here for navigating the college admissions process, which is the much anticipated annual event for Alma Maters dating back to 2010. Alma Maters is a standing committee of the Barnard Alumni Association Board. Its mission is to foster open, thoughtful discussion about balancing the joys and challenges of motherhood in all stages. I am so pleased to introduce this morning Jennifer Fondler, and Barnard's Vice President for Enrollment and Communications. Jennifer is a successful enrollment management leader with strong communication, analytic, and technical skills, and a strong focus on marketing, access, and inclusion in higher education. She has been at Barnard since 2000, leading efforts to identify, attract, counsel, enroll, and retain students from all backgrounds and perspectives. She currently oversees the Office of Admissions and Financial Aid, Family Engagement, and the Communications Department at the college, where she focuses on the college's strategic messaging, media relations, Barnard's website, and social media, and the alumni magazine, which we all love. Prior to Barnard, Jennifer held the positions of Director of Admissions at Eugene Lang College at the New School and Assistant Dean of Admissions at Wesleyan University. Jennifer is a graduate of Barnard, as we said, and holds a Master's of Arts in Higher Education Administration from Teachers College, Columbia University. This morning, Jennifer will share with you the current climate for college admissions. She will cover factors to consider in the increasingly selective environment, what to expect in the years following up to the actual application, and a detailed overview of what happens at Barnard specifically and other colleges. Following the talk, Jennifer will be happy to answer questions. Please join me in welcoming Jennifer.
All right, I put my mic on. I think you can all hear me well, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm really excited to be here this morning. I'm seeing a lot of familiar faces in the room, which is always really nice. I'm seeing some high school students, I believe, in the room, maybe younger, I don't know. And so talking this morning, it's definitely about the whole process, right? Because we might be talking about things that are happening even in middle school, early high school, and then all the way on up to the college process. I loved how Jessica, you started by saying that Alma Maters Club was about the joys of motherhood. So I've gone through the college process twice personally with two daughters. With joy all the time, but it was definitely a process, and two very different kinds of daughters who were both prepared in very different ways and looking at very different kinds of things. So it was very humbling, I will say, after having worked in this profession for so many years, to have children that went through this whole process. So that may come into play as we talk this morning a little bit. I did put together. Let's see. A PowerPoint just to kind of guide our discussion a little bit. And, I think I just wanted to start by saying it's been a very interesting couple of years. I think that you've probably heard many stories from friends, from other family, from your children's teachers, college counselors, guidance counselors about what the landscape is in the admissions process. I think when COVID hit, it really threw a lot of things up in the air in terms of how we were reaching students, how students could learn about our schools if they were not able to visit and about the process itself, what kinds of forms they could complete, and what happened with testing, right? So there were a lot of these in-person things that students were doing that were really thrown up in the air, and we sort of had to rethink this process a little bit. The good part is that it really opened up access for a lot of students, where we put a lot of things online. We were able to do lots of Zoom meetings with students, and much of our process was online. So the paperwork has really moved online from many years ago. The negative parts, I think, were a little bit trying to get to know students, and then having students sort of navigate this whole process in terms of what requirements we have, and what requirements we could have. And so we'll talk through all the pieces in the application this morning to sort of give you a sense of like where things are at right now. But I know some of the things that are probably on your minds are like where are colleges at with testing, right? That's one big thing. And then the different kinds of applications that students are using, what they're writing about, how they're presenting themselves. And then the last thing, which is probably maybe the first thing, is just the plethora of applications that are out there, right? That, we hear, some of you have heard about Barnard, and I was speaking with somebody a little while ago about, in my years here, just the amount of growth of applications. So I'll look at it as the amount of interest in Barnard, which is amazing, but because of that interest, the number of applications have grown. And while we have grown as a college, we haven't grown that much as a college. And so our numbers are a little limited as well. Our enrollment right now hovers around 3,000 students. And so each entering class is around 700 students. When you were all here, many of you are probably around like my era, within 10 years or so, we were around 500 students per class. So when we think about that, it really has grown since those days. Now we have acquired several more dorms since then. We built a dorm. Well, that was being built when I was here. So for many of you, it was already here. So Sulzberger, but we've since acquired 2 or 3 additional residence halls. Still probably not enough housing, but it has allowed us to grow a little bit as well. So, I think I sort of put it in this slide up in 3 different sections. So thinking about touch points along the way and sort of how students are finding out and looking at colleges these days, about the admissions timetable. And so we'll go over what terms mean, right? What does early decision mean? What does early action mean? What is regular decision, those things, and thinking about crafting an application, what goes into that application, and then how are colleges looking at those pieces. So I'll just, I'll start with that tours and touch points. Across the country, students have so many different kinds of choices, right? There's 3,000 plus colleges and universities in this country. And I know that many of you are from the New York area, but some of you are not from this New York area. And I think, in where we are, there's this glut in the northeastern seaboard of liberal arts colleges and other wonderful schools. But there's a whole world out there. And I think that the students from this northeastern part of the United States often think this is it. This is all I can look at. What I do think has happened in the last several years is, and because of the competitive nature of schools, is that students have needed to look further afield. And there are amazing colleges out there. And so I always do want students to really keep an open mind. I remember back when I was in high school and my college counselor said to me, oh, you should look at this school, Earlham College. And I said, well, Earlham College, where the heck is that? I've never heard of it. And it was a school in the Midwest, and it was an excellent school, but it was not even on like my radar, my parents' radar, anybody. And so it felt like it was sort of like out of a hat. But I do want students to really keep an open mind, because there are wonderful schools that are out there, and they need to have a wider pool of schools to look at. I'm from and we're all here at a liberal arts college, and what that really means is that it's a smaller institution, it's mostly residential based. And it has a particular approach to the curriculum. Although I will say most universities, so if a student's going to a university, most of them are approaching it from a liberal arts perspective, so that there will be a certain core number of classes they will take that sort of span across a number of different areas, so that they do get that breadth of curriculum, unless they're looking at particular kinds of programs, whether it's an arts program or an engineering program, something like that. because we've been hybrid now, there are wonderful opportunities to do tours online and to do information sessions online. There's nothing like visiting a school though, right? And so when we were able to open again and have students come here, that was like the happiest day of my life, where students were coming onto campus and I just stood in the visitor center. I didn't need to, but I just stood there watching people come in, and it was really, really wonderful. And so if you can get out to see places, I mean, I always tell students, even locally, when I start speaking with them and thinking about just asking general questions, right? Do you think you want to go to a big school, a small school, a school that's in a city, a school that, and what their answer often is, oh no, right? They're teenagers and they often say that to many things. So I say, just go somewhere like locally, like visit a school just so you can see what a campus is like, what a more city environment is like. Go visit a local university so you can see sort of like, what does that feel like? I was talking with a family yesterday, and this son has visited schools pretty much all over the country, and was telling me the different places he's visited. And I said, well, what did you like about this place and that place? And it was very hard for him to articulate. He's like, I don't know. It was just the X factor. Okay. So it's really important as students visit to try to note some things, because they do start to blend together and start to feel a little bit the same. College admissions offices do in their staffs, we often split up into territories. So you're going to look onto a college admissions website and you'll see the name of an admissions officer and the territories they cover. I find it's really helpful, if you can at some point, for your children to send an email or get to know that person, if the person may be visiting their high school, or when they do go to take a tour, see if that individual is around. I always find it's really nice to put a face to a name, and that person is more likely to know about your daughter or son's high school, their curriculum, all of that. So just making that connection is really nice. And it's also nicer to ask a question to a person than to admissions@barnard.edu if you're sending an email. And so most websites will have the names and the territories that admissions officers are covering. Other things that I wanted to say, well, we're going to get to other touch points a little bit later, particularly a conversation around interviews in this process, and sort of like how that's changed a little bit in the last number of years. So I think, let me go on to the next slide. I wanted to talk a little bit about the admissions timeline. I feel like my life lives in a cycle. It's been in a cycle for many years, where we are now is we're wrapping up the class that will be enrolling in the fall. So some of us, so we admitted students in late, sort of middle of the spring. And then there's often what we'll talk about waitlist processes that go on. Transfer admission happens around this time. And then the summer is a time of planning. It's a time of summer college fairs, where we might meet students and counselors at different schools. Some of your children may be going to summer programs or different kinds of camps where they may actually have colleges come in and talk to students. So we're doing a lot of that kind of thing now and throughout the summer. Fall hits, so for us, mid-August, early September, and our staff will, what we say, go on the road. So we will visit high schools all across the country. We'll welcome, I mean, we're always welcoming students onto campus, but more so we'll be out visiting high schools across the country, speaking with students, speaking with counselors. Obviously, we can't hit everywhere, right, at every moment. And so every year we sort of switch up where we visit. And some of it is for us to be able to see students, but some of it is for us to also be able to know what particular high schools are like. I mean, I really want to be able to get into a school, because if I'm reading an application, I don't want to just know it on paper. I want to kind of feel what it's like and know what these students are going through physically in their settings. And so we do try to get out to visit lots of different high schools. So then mid-fall will hit. And for students, they've been hopefully starting in their junior year, some earlier, starting to think about schools, looking online. I'm starting to maybe go out and visit different places. That will also then happen over the summer. It'll happen into the fall, but fall hits, school starts and things get really, really busy. So it's then hard to do a family trip or to go with your children or send them to visit schools. But you kind of have to, fit it all in and make lists and think about where you can go and when. So it takes up some weekends. It might take up some of the short school vacations to visit different schools. So these terms are different kinds of application plans. So early decision is a program where both the student and the college are making a decision. So a student has looked at lots of different schools and decided if this school has this program, this is the school I really, really love. I really would love to go to. And so I'm going to apply to this one school in early, and that's usually November 1 or November 15th. And then the school will review the applications and usually give a decision by about a month later. So early December is when that decision will come out. If a student is admitted at that point, student's done. They wouldn't apply anywhere else. They've committed to that institution. The institution is now committed to them. There are other decisions that could happen at that time. So some students at that time might be denied, in which case the student then has time to submit regular decision applications to other schools, or there might be other schools that have an early decision that's a later deadline. So they might do a different early decision at that point because they had a second school that they really, really, really loved as well. And then there is a third decision that some schools have, which is basically deferring the application. So saying, you know what, we're not quite ready to make a decision. We're really intrigued and really interested in your application, but not ready to make a decision. So we're going to now put you in the regular decision pool. And so at that point, it's no longer a binding decision if you're admitted, but you're now reviewed with the population of students that are applying in the regular pool. And then we will give you a decision at the usually the end of March at that point. And then you have some time to decide, because hopefully at that point, maybe you're admitted to other schools, but also hopefully at that point, if you're admitted to our school, you still loved it like you did back into November and choose to enroll at that point. So there's that early decision that might be November. Some schools have a second early decision program that is usually in January. So some schools or students are doing that. Some schools also have something called early action. And the difference between early decision and early action is that the school is taking an action on your application, but you don't have to decide as a student. So if you apply early action to a school and you're admitted in early December, you can then still apply to other schools. But it's so nice to know, that you have that admit offer, or you might say, but I really want to go there. So then you can put down the deposit and be done with the process as if you were an early decision student. There's so many cases in the admissions process where we say it depends, right? Because the deadlines that I've thrown out, like it depends. You really have to look at every school's website, because some of the deadlines vary. Some of the early action deadlines are going to be earlier, later. And so you really do want to look at every school. I had one child who was extremely organized, like charts, color coded, the whole thing. And the other child was like, the papers flowing from the backpack. And so it was much easier with the first child, because she had this whole chart of like all the schools she was interested in, when all the deadlines are, what kinds of things they offer, programs, all that kind of stuff. So, unfortunately, she was the second child, so it would have been nice if she was the first. I feel like that, but it's all right. But if you can help your children to be organized in this process, it does really help to have these kinds of charts, even, and just add to them to know what's going on. The other thing that I just want to say, and I often say this to parents, are that, as parents, we do want to help. And we often want to help in ways that means we want to do it for our children. And so we're going to be the ones that like make the chart, and we're going to be the ones that will make sure that they're meeting that deadline, or that we're setting up the tour, we're calling the college with the question or emailing. And we have to be really careful. This is a time in their life where I highly recommend that you try to let them do it a little bit themselves. You know, if they want to, they need to make a phone call and they're like, but I don't know what to say. Okay, practice with them on what to say, stand behind them, but like push them and force them to make that call. Because trust me, like months later, it's going to be really, really helpful, because what also happens is they get into college, you drop them off, and then suddenly they have to do all of this stuff. And some of them are very unprepared at that point. But if they've done some of this stuff during the process, you watch them grow right before your eyes and being able to be a little bit more independent in this process. And, it's nice because I think as parents, we're there to like help, push it along a little bit, but not to do it for them. And, I always remember an email that I got from a mom, and she said, I'm writing because I was submitting my daughter's application the other day. I didn't get, confirmation email, and I just wanted to make sure that it went through. And I was like, okay, there's definitely something wrong with this email. But it was like the perfect example of, wait a minute, when did you were doing this? Like, what else did you do? And right, and what did you write? And all that. Okay, so regular decision deadlines generally are January 1, January 15th, February 1. So that kind of timeline. And then decisions, when I've been working at Barnard for so long, and have been working at pretty selective colleges where the decisions usually are coming out at the end of March. And what I saw as my children were going through this process, right? So like a number of years later, where I'm not necessarily so in the loop of all colleges that are out there, is starting in January, she kept coming home every day saying, oh, so-and-so got in here, so-and-so got in here. I was like, they're sending your decisions already? Decisions come out all the time between January and the end of March. Generally, the more selective colleges need more time and are often sending their decisions out all on a particular date or a little bit later in the process. But you will find that students are hearing at all different times in this process. And I, in some ways, I found that really nice that they were getting some of the, if a student was getting admitted, they were sort of like hearing early, even if they had other things that they were looking at, they still were getting sort of that acknowledgement really early, or they were not getting in. It's sort of like, they needed to figure out how to manage that now, because what might they need to manage a little bit later. So, so it was helpful for some to hear those decisions a little bit earlier. And then I put on here rolling decision, because there are schools that also have rolling decision processes where you might apply even in September, October, and they will give you a decision within, for some places, a number of days, for some places, a number of weeks. So just wanted people to be aware of that, but to, make sure that you understand the different kinds of processes. The one thing that I will mention, and this really speaks to the competitive nature of colleges and what it's prompted students to do, and this is really more around early decision, is that you will, sometimes your children will come home and they have to, they've had a college session, they've been talking to their friends, I have to apply early decision. Where do you want to apply? I don't know, but I have to apply early decision. And I get it. It's really competitive. And so students feel this pressure that either they see all of their other friends applying early decision, and so they feel like I'm late to the game, I need to have that too. Or when we look at percentages of applications in an early program, in a regular program, and some schools will publish this information where the percentages of students that are getting in through an early program or a regular program. And so the feeling that I need to apply early because my chances are better, I can't deny it. I have to say that is the landscape. But in the end, I also want your child to be comfortable and really all in where they're applying. So it's this balance of wanting to look early enough so that they, maybe hopefully you'll find someplace that you really do love, but also knowing, you know what, you need to have a lot of options of places you love, because nothing is a guarantee. You may apply early, it might not happen. And so, let's keep lots of options open. But, if something really does emerge, early decision is a good route to go for many students. There are some students who maybe didn't have such a, so maybe they started high school really well, and then junior year, didn't do so well. And then, so the summer comes, they're thinking about schools, they're looking at schools, they find some that they're really interested in, and they're now really motivated in their senior year. There are sometimes students who say, you know what, I'm not going to apply early because I didn't really have an impressive junior spring semester, but I'm really going to, put it into gear in my senior year. And so I want that extra set of grades before I put in my application. So lots of discussions that should be had with both your child, but more so I think with your guidance counselor, college counselor, teachers, to figure out what is the right kind of decision plan, and as you're looking at different schools, of different schools to apply to. But I did want to sort of throw that out there, of reasons why students might apply or not apply an early decision. The other piece that I also wanted to briefly address is around financial aid. We're not going to talk so much about financial aid today, but I want to say this now. For everything, including financial aid. If after this session you have questions, please know that my email is open and I'm happy to take any questions you have in this whole process at any point, and have a great staff. If I can't answer it, I'll pass it on to a staff member, but we are really happy to take any questions that you have. But with regards to financial aid, for some students and families, that is a major consideration. There are some schools that only offer need-based aid and other schools that offer merit aid. That may be a reason why a student might say, you know what, I need to keep my options open. I need to apply to a number of schools to see what kind of financial aid I might get at different institutions. The financial the formulas are changing this year. Some of you may have been reading about it, some not, most probably not, but the FAFSA, which is the free application for federal student aid, which is the main application that all colleges in the country use, whether you're going to a community college or you're going to a Barnard, every school in the country uses the FAFSA. They are changing some of their formula this year. And they haven't told us what it will be, right? Like what things exactly they're changing. Well, they better hurry up because we need to know and you need to know, because if early decision deadlines are coming up in November, the FAFSA normally opens up in October. So families can start to put in that paperwork in October. Well, they better tell us by October or else everybody's, going to be in a little trouble. And what that would mean is we're going to have to give estimates to families at different schools until we know the final results of what the FAFSA is doing. And they're calling it FAFSA simplification. So if you go after today and you Google FAFSA simplification, there'll be a lot of literature that will come up that will tell you kind of the kinds of things that are changing in the formulas that are being used. Okay. So the next thing is, and we're going to get to the pieces of the application, but I have two slides. One is, well, you can't really see it so much, but it says more things that are in a student's control or what a student has more control over. And then the next slide is what you have less control over, and so the more control is you direct this process as a child, right? That hopefully, right, of the kinds of places that you'll look at, looking at guidebooks and even thinking about, I may like the name of a school, but I have no idea if I'm qualified in a very general sense until I start to look at some of the data and the trends of the kinds of GPAs that those schools are accepting, the SAT ranges of that school, all those kinds of factors. So student doing their research and crafting their list, they have control over that, right? The longer they wait to do that, less control you have, because now you're in a rush, right? So the more time they have to be able to just inch away at it, I think is good. The courses taken and grades earned, right? That's also in the less control part, because what you have now is what you have, but you still have time, right? Senior year or junior year, wherever grade you're in, like hasn't happened yet. And so you still have time in terms of picking your classes and really, working hard to get the best grades that you can get. As students will look at different schools are going to generally tell you what they're looking at, right? And if you look at generally in high school, students take 5 major subjects for 4 years, right? That would be sort of like the standard. But we all know that students have choices. In some schools, high schools only might require 2 years of a foreign language, or they might only require, 3 years or 2 years of a math. Well, more competitive schools are going to want to see more years than just 2 or 3 years of those subject areas. But there might be areas where a student wants to drop an area, but pick up a second subject in another area that they might be really interested in. And so we want students to be able to have some of those choices. And it's this balance between having those choices and having a competitive program. Now, competitive is an interesting term because it is all about who your children are, and it's all about balance and what they can handle. And so if a family comes to me and says, my child is taking 4 AP classes next year, is that enough? I have no idea what your child is like as a student, what your child can handle, how many AP courses maybe are offered at your school. I say AP, there are many schools that don't offer AP at all, so please don't think I'm only talking about AP. Some schools have what's called the International Baccalaureate curriculum. There are some schools that have their own curriculum and don't offer any structured courses like an AP or an IB, but they might offer honors classes. So schools are looking to see what the rigor is like, and we'll talk a little bit more about rigor. But students, you have some control over this in picking your programs and in trying to do your best. It's your writing. So in your application for students, they have full control over their writing. The longer they wait, the more rushed they are with their writing. And we all realize some of us have fortes and some of us don't. Some of us are great writers and some it's a little more challenging. And so trying to find the right kind of help in your writing and thinking about what you want to write about, you have time now to be thinking about those things and to be doing lots and lots of drafts. So control over that. Meeting deadlines and reading emails are really, really important. Students don't read emails today. Heck, many of us don't read emails today, but emails are still a mode of communication in this process. There are some schools that have moved to texting students because students aren't reading their emails. I'm still a little cringy at me texting a student about this process, but when push comes to shove and they haven't responded to something, I have now resorted to texting a student, and it's amazing how quickly they will respond. But there is this balance, and they do need to read their emails throughout this process. And then personalization, putting themselves out there. When we talk about control over giving their narrative in this process, they are telling a college who they are and who they perceive themselves to be. And it's in lots of different ways, right? We're seeing some of the objective kind of data, but then so much in this process is the some more subjective, right? Of writing an essay and of even like, they choose activities, but how do they tell us about the different activities that they're involved in or spending their time after school or their background and where they come from? They choose what they want to tell us. And so we want them to get some guidance, certainly from you and from their counselors and teachers on that, and from the colleges. They'll get guidance from colleges as well, but they have control over that. So less control. Again, can't go back and change your grades and your test scores. They are what they are, right? And so at a certain point, they might be extremely upset about that C that they got. You know what? You had a C. You have more than one C, maybe. How do you move on from that, and how do you think about this process and work with that, right? And some of it is thinking about the schools that you will ultimately choose, and where your grades fall and what seems appropriate in thinking about that. And same with test scores. We'll talk a little bit more about test scores later. School grading and course, is this working right? You won't hear me still? Yeah.
Yeah.
School grading and course policies. I alluded to schools having different kinds of courses. And part of our job as admissions officers is to understand what schools are like. And so every school provides us with some sort of profile. And that profile indicates everything from where the school is located, maybe what is the makeup in that general area, like the socioeconomic makeup in that town so that we understand where students might be coming from, what kinds of courses they offer, right? So do they offer honors courses or AP or IB, or do they offer, they require every student to do an internship, or does every student required to do a volunteer course or program at their school? I know there's some students here that are in schools that are that have dual curriculums. So some of the religious oriented schools have dual curriculums. So understanding that, so we will hear from schools about that. But as a student, you are in the school that you are in, right? You're not changing that. You live where you live, and so students hear stories of, oh, I live in New York, I don't live in Idaho. If only I lived in Idaho, I had a better chance of getting into college. You're not moving to Idaho. You know, while schools are looking to diversify, but I still say in this New York area, like students in this New York area are my bread and butter, right? And so yes, we do have a lot of students, but so we're probably about around 60% or so Northeast, but 40% of our students are coming from many, you know, many other areas. So you got to work with what you have, I think, as a student. And then recommendations. You might say, well, I don't know what my teacher is going to write. And that's true. You don't know what your teacher is going to write, and you don't know what your college counselor might write. You hope that you know them and they know you well enough that you think you know what they will write. But you can also guide them a little bit and have conversations with them. Sometimes students, I've seen them with my own kids. I'm going to go ask my teacher for the recommendation. I said, okay, so let's play this out. What are you going to say? I don't know. I'm going to go and ask them if they'll give me a recommendation. Okay, let's talk this through a little more, because you don't just want to say that, right? You want to, because you might be asking them early when you don't know where you're applying. And so you may ask a teacher for a recommendation. And you want to say that at that point, look, when I know where I'm applying, I'm going to give you a heads up, right? I'm going to tell you this kind of schools that I'm applying to, and I'm going to tell you why. And remember that great paper that I wrote last year that you loved? Can you mention that in my recommendation? Or remember that discussion we had in class, and like you said, I did so well in that discussion. Maybe you want to mention that, like give them some ideas of what you want them to talk about. I'm telling you, they will really appreciate it, because sometimes teachers are, and they keep notes on students, but sometimes they're racking their brains to remember the details. And in recommendation letters, we often get recommendation letters that have adjectives. Many adjectives. The student is responsible, and they are intelligent, and they are extraordinary, and they are proactive. But I want examples of those things, because otherwise adjectives, every student has lots of good adjectives. You know, teachers, I do think if they are writing for you, they want to be able to say good things, and they want to be able to really advocate for you as a student, but they sometimes need a little guidance in that. So, and it used to be when we were all applying to college, your parents would probably tell you, and your counselor might have told you, you would bring the piece of paper with a self-addressed stamped envelope, right? And that was the important thing, that self-addressed stamped envelope to the teacher. And now what happens is students are applying online, and when they go to fill out their application, they will list the teacher and their email, and then the teacher will get an email from the application service. So we use the Common Application. They will get an email from Common Application that says, here's where your student can upload here's where you can upload the recommendation letter. There are some schools that use programs called Naviance, which coordinates that process a little bit. So they just really want to talk to their college counselor in their school about where to direct those recommendations, and the school will sure tell them what to do with regard to the recommendation letters. And then the evaluation process, right? Students have little control over the evaluation process, and that's where it really feels like it becomes this mystery, and they put in their application and then they're just sitting and waiting, and they are just sitting and waiting. And that's where you can just be supportive, right? In this very balanced way of talking about it when they want to talk about it, and then just leaving them alone when they don't want to talk about it. But even, you know, up until applying, and then as students are waiting, you know, even with my own kids, there was this, like, I felt like I was a nag all the time, even though I don't think, I don't think it was, but like they definitely perceived me as nagging all the time, because I was always asking questions. And so just trying to find that balance with them. Okay. So here are lots of pieces of the application. And we've talked a little bit about some of them. I will say with a transcript, as we're evaluating a transcript, I am less interested in an end result GPA, and I'm more interested in how a student came at that GPA, because you could have a 3.4 GPA, right? 3 people in this room could have a 3.4 GPA, and one person could be a great student except for history, and that's always the class that they get a weaker grade in, and that ends up with a 3.4 GPA. They had to have done really not so well in history to have that would be the one grade that they always get. And then there could be another student who has a 3.4, and they were, they had a really hard sophomore year, right? So they might have been great student first year, junior, senior year, but sophomore year is what threw down their GPA. And so they end up with a 3.4. And then there could be another student who's like, just coasting along and like all, doing sort of the same in courses, and they end up with a 3.4. Those are 3 totally different kinds of learners and totally different kinds of students. And I want to know like all of that meat and all of that information. So me just seeing a GPA doesn't tell me the whole story by any means. My kids every year, they got their grade report in school, but we never actually put them all together to see a transcript. I think in junior year, a lot of students will then their school will give them like a full transcript. But I think it's always really interesting for a family to sit down, like, let's look at your transcript. Now, some students may look at their transcript and be like, it's perfect, right? And I've got like, I've taken every top course, and most students are not like that. Most students, either there's like a little blip here and there, or maybe they had a certain kind of trajectory, or they did pick and choose different kinds of classes. And so they should sit with their transcript a little bit and tell their story to you, or tell their story to their counselor, so that they can think about, are there any things I want the college to know? Because remember, that evaluation process is going to come, and I'm looking, not talking to you, so I'm looking at what I have. So if there was a reason why you don't do so well in history, or sophomore year was not so great, figure out how way to tell the college that. I mean, it could be that you have a particular story, and on the application, there's a place that says, is there anything you'd like us to know? Well, that's a perfect place to talk about that. Or you might talk to your counselor and ask them to say, well, maybe, is this something you might be able to mention, or just figure out a way to get that information across, because otherwise I have to make assumptions. And so if I see, certain grades that are not so great, one assumption might be, well, you didn't work so hard in that class. But that's not sometimes true. Sometimes you worked really hard for that C, and you're incredibly proud of that C. And you have that teacher be the teacher recommendation because they knew that. So even teacher recommendations don't have to be all from teachers where you got the A in. Could be from the teacher maybe where you didn't do as well, but you worked so hard and you really improved in that area. So just sometimes, things to think about in that regard. Let's see. Let's move here. So I think I've talked a little bit about some of these things. On top I wrote, do you have an intended major? Most students I think are applying to college either having ideas of what they want to study, or having no idea what they want to study, or looking at a very specialized program, either in a particular school, or a school like an engineering school, or an art school, or a business program within a particular school. But most students don't really have an idea, or they have lots of ideas. So on the Common Application, it allows, I think, 3 choices to put down for a major. At Barnard, we don't hold you to that by any means. You don't pick your major here until the end of your 2nd year, but it does kind of guide us, right? If you write chemistry, physics, and math for your 3 areas, do I have an expectation as I look at your transcript that I'm hoping that I'm going to see a little bit more advanced courses in those areas, and that you've done better in those areas? Yes, right? But I don't want those to be the areas where you're not doing so well, because then there's like a disconnect between what you want to do and where we think you're competitively sit for a place like Barnard. But there are lots of students who will write, biology, dance, and anthropology. Oh, you're like all over the place. Great. We want students to be able to come in and think about lots of different things. I actually think it's like a little bit of a loaded question, because many kids have never taken an anthropology course. So how do you know you want to major in anthropology? My daughter came into Barnard very set on theater, right? She had applied to a lot of art schools and was convinced to look at liberal arts colleges, and so was really focused on theater, came in here and realized, wow, there's all these other kind of courses I could try, and that ultimately didn't want to major in theater, wanted to do a lot of theater, but didn't want to look at theater as an academic focus, and ended up as a sociology major. You know, it's very, very different from what I ever thought she would be doing, and what she ever thought she would be doing. So, you know, your transcript doesn't kind of totally dictate what we or correlate to what we see in those majors, but sometimes it does. So just to be aware of that. And so also in this like rigor and balance and taking courses for success, we sort of have a running, I don't want to say it's a running joke, but it's a running comment in the admissions world, where a student will come to us and say, you know, is it better if I take AP calculus and get a B, or the regular calculus and get an A? Because you want A's on your transcript, that would look better, but the rigor is really important too. So part of me says, well, why do you assume you're going to get a B, right? So I want you to take that course, but I also want you to look at your whole schedule and talk to your parents and your counselor and teachers about your whole schedule. And does it make sense for you to take that AP calculus if you are also doing other courses and sort of picking and choosing? Or a student that comes to me and says, is it better if I take AP computer science or AP physics? I'm like, I mean, they're both really hard and they're both really good classes, and I don't know the rest of your curriculum. So to my mind, like total toss up on that one. You know, you need to figure that out with your counselor, but like neither is a bad option there. And then there are going to be students that can't handle that rigor at all. And I think as parents, we need to really be supportive, because it's not all about, we want you to get into this competitive college to get into this competitive college. This is about like who you are as a student and where you're at. And we need to be supportive in whatever our children are doing. And if it means that we need to let go of some of the desires maybe that we have and think, wow, we need to really look at the appropriate kinds of places for our child, that is really important. I remember when I took my daughter out of a particular school when she was in elementary school and put her in another school because it was not working for her. Some of the parents said, why are you taking her out of this excellent school? And I said, it's not working for her. She's the kind of learner that she is. And they said, oh, that's an excellent answer. Why would you not think of that? We really do need to think about our own children and not about what we want in this process so much. Okay. So this is an old way of how things were listed, but I threw up a lot of different things here about extracurriculars, and really I should rename this because it's not about extracurriculars. It's really about figuring out how students spend their time when they're not in class. And to me, that's what it's all about. There are some students that are doing really organized activities, and there are some students that are doing very singular things, right? So they might not be in 7 clubs, but they might be a creative writer. So they're like very solitary and they love to write and they're doing it by themselves. And you might say, oh, why don't you get out and do things? But they love to write, or they love to journal, or they're a poet and they want to go and they want to do spoken word on the weekends. And that is so not something that you may know about. So it's trying to help them figure out all along in high school what things click for them. And sometimes things click and sometimes things don't. And so they keep trying different kinds of things. COVID really, as we all know, wreaked havoc on all of us, and particularly on kids, and figuring out how they could spend their time. Some were really able to capture new interests that they had, were able to do things online, and some just like melted and could do nothing. I think we really acknowledge that, and we're trying to be really sensitive to that. Again, it's about what did you do if you were melting and felt like you were doing nothing? I'm sure you're doing something. So like, how do they capture some of those early high school years? Because now we're getting to a point where, like the last 2 years, they've been able to do things, right? So they're now, we're going to start to see that they have lots of things that they are doing and finding. But those early kind of years were a little bit rough for a lot of students. And I have this word up here, leadership. Working and having gone to Barnard, we learn a lot about leadership. And what I have learned is there is not one type of leader. I go think about my own two kids, and one child would be happy to stand up here and speak to you all. She is very extroverted. She's the theater kid. She has no problem. And the other one would say, and so one would perceive that in some ways as a leader. The other kid would say, why would I want to get up here and talk? I would like you to be in the back checking you all in and like giving you the labels and being very, that's the organized one. Right? And so, but that's leadership too. And so I think, when colleges talk about looking for leaders, they're not necessarily looking for that extroverted person and the one who has all the titles, because we all know that your child might have almost been the editor-in-chief of the newspaper, but there's only one. And so they didn't get it. But they have every quality to be an editor-in-chief of a newspaper. And so it's thinking about how do they define, how do you all define leadership, and how do you pull that out for them in an application when it might not be those titled roles. So I think in our process, and part of the way that we are, and many colleges are reviewing applications, are to try to get under the layers, right? So we see the grades, we see the lists of activities. Now let's get underneath and understand why they took those courses, what those courses meant to them, what their teachers are saying. And same with activities. Why are they doing them? What have they meant to them? How could we see them translating to a place like Barnard or wherever? And that's what we're trying to get at. And so we're getting at that through the essays and through the writing pieces that we ask students, and through some of these lists, right? So the lists and the activities do allow you to give some descriptors of things as well. There are some places in the application because of COVID to be able to talk about what your life was like during COVID. Was there something that you really want to express to us? There is no judgment here. So I think there are some students who say, oh my gosh, I have to tell them about this, what happened in my family, what happened in my town, whatever. And there are other students that said, well, I'm not, it wasn't so dramatic. What do I need to say something? And they don't need to say anything. And others that say, oh my God, it was awful. And you may say, oh God, it wasn't that awful. If they feel it's awful, give them every right to be able to write about that. There's no judgment to say that something was more awful than another thing, right? And so that's really important. And same with going back to extracurriculars. I'm not here to judge to say that because one student plays tennis and another student volunteers and another student has an after-school job, that one is better than the other. Students are making choices, and it's how they talk about those choices and what they learn from those choices. Same with, I get a lot of families will ask me, is it good to do a summer program? Right? Do a summer program at a college, or my kid loves camp, but they can't do camp anymore, right? They need to do other things. I don't know. I mean, camp's great. Like, you're never going to have a time to do camp again. But I say, can you do camp and something else in the summer? Like, maybe you can do two things, or we're trying to just figure out with them what means something to them, but we're not here to judge to say that one is better than the other. We don't have too much time left, so did want to just talk a little bit about essays. Common Application has lots of different topics that students can write about. And I usually say to students, use this time between now and the end of the summer to do lots of like small writing for all the topics to see like what you like, because you may look at their topics and say, oh, that's what you should do. That one, I like this one. Why do you want to do that one? Let them write about all these topics, like smaller paragraphs, to see what kind of works. I said to my kids at the end of the summer, have a draft of something. Because again, fall hits, they get really busy and then they don't look at anything, or they're scrambling. And so at least they have a draft where they can work on something, or a couple of drafts of different things. And so for some, it is eking that out of them in the summer. For some, it's really easy, but it is really important that they start to kind of that process now, even just getting something on paper, that it's not going to, look like the end result now. And then the only other thing, and I'll use my family as an example again, is, we expect that writing is going to look like a 17, 18-year-old writing, not like a 35, 40, 45-year-old person. And so, or that it's not going to look like, ChatGPT AI writing. Are they going to look up all those things? I'm sure they are. We've already taken some of our essays and put them into ChatGPT to see what came out. We're like, damn, that was a good essay that came out. But what I will say is, it didn't have like a feel to it. And, it was like very generic in a way, but it had good content, but it was very generic. And so, and then look, kids get help on their essays. I write a letter, I get somebody to proof my letter. So I'm not saying that students shouldn't get help, but in the end, it needs to be their own writing. And so I remember my daughter wrote her essay and she brings it to us and she said, Mom, Dad, can you look at it? And so I say, okay, when do you want it back? And, the next day or okay, no problem. And so I, sit down that night and I read pen and I said, think about this word here, or maybe expand on this part here, and so does it give her some ideas. And my husband says, one day, only one day, I might need a couple, because he's an editor. This is like his profession. That was bad to begin with, but I'm good and bad, because he comes back and it's like all like crossed out, rewritten, the whole thing. Now, my daughter was very smart and looked at him and said, are you kidding me, Dad? Like, first of all, I have no idea what these words mean. Second of all, that is not what I wanted to say. So why did you say that? And third, like, this doesn't sound like me. And she was totally right. And so, there's got to be this limit of where we help them. And so in her final essay, he was cringing because he still felt like things still doesn't sound good. Like, you know what? I don't care. It's hers. And she owns it and she's happy with it. And in the end, I want my child happy. So she submitted it and she got into college. All's good, right? So it's this balance, I think, in there. What else do I have? Okay, so SATs and all these kind of stuff. Well, I'll just talk maybe about the SATs. So during COVID, lots of schools every school had to be test optional at that point, right? Students were not able to take exams. I think many schools have used that as an opportunity to say, you know what, let's step back a little bit and look a little bit about how we're reviewing applications. Like we've had to review their test scores. What has it been for us? And then thinking about where they want to move ahead. Barnard has still not decided. We're still in that stepping back part. And so we are still test optional for one more year, at which point we'll make a decision if we're going to bring back that requirement for SAT or ACT, or decide to become test optional at that point. And so you have to speak to every school and find out what their programs and options are. There is a good website at the bottom called fairtest.org that does a very, very good updated list of every college out there and whether or not they are test optional or not. And I would say that I'm still seeing that there are many students that are taking SATs, and they're then looking at colleges and saying, okay, the colleges that are publishing the range of scores that students are taking, are scoring. Do I fall like in the upper end of that range? Do I fall in the lower end? Do I fall way low? Do I fall in the middle? And that's sort of helping them determine whether or not they want to submit their scores. If they're falling way below, optional, don't need to submit. Why would you submit if you're way below? So it's a little bit of common sense right now for some students to be able to decide whether or not they should submit their scores. If students are submitting their scores and they're in that middle upper range, for a place like Barnard, what am I doing? I'm looking at that, I'm like, excellent. Okay, now let's move on to all the other things, right? So I'm using it as a frame a little bit to understand what they are like as a test taker, and also sometimes the split in the areas of the test. But I am looking so much more at their transcript, their courses, their recommendations, and all of those things as well. And then just the last thing that I will talk about is the nature of interviews is really starting to change. When we were applying to college, it was usually required. I remember Chris Royer, some of you remember Chris Royer, who was the admissions dean at the time that I applied to college, at least. I remember going for an interview with her and it was like very, very nerve-wracking. And then like the nerves moved in this process to SATs, right? The nerves have now moved into the competitive nature of this process. Way far from interviews. Many places they still offer them, many places don't offer them anymore. With the amounts of applications that schools are getting, they just cannot accommodate the numbers of interviews. And even though they're optional, with a school that has 12,000 applications and we could interview 1,000 students, it was, so for us right now, we're on a little bit of a pause and a hiatus to figure out what we want to do with our interviewing program. So last year we did not do interviews, and we're not going to do interviews again this year, to figure out what is that touch point that we want for students to maybe have with a staff member or an alum who might do interviews. So ask different schools. You know, what I said to my kids in this process too, and would say to students is, if there are things that are optional, but they might benefit, right? If you would do well in an interview, can do one, go for it, have an interview. You might be the kind of kid though who would be like very petrified doing an interview. Don't push it, you know, if that's who you are. So just thinking about that in this process. I think that was it for my slides. We're right almost at the end, but I'm happy to take any questions that you have. Maybe just like one or two questions. And then again, I'll give you, I have some cards here, but you can always find me online to ask any questions. Thank you.
So you're getting like 11,000 applications. Do you find those are all, you know, pretty qualified kids, or do you get a whole range, like it's Common App? I'm just gonna check off.
Yeah, I mean, so yes, so this past year, we had 11,804 applications to be exact. You know, the majority of those applicants could do the work at Barnard. And so in varying degrees, but the majority were competent applicants. And so that's where it does become great. You know, there were very few that were like so off and in the negative end. So we really were, and we do take every application like very seriously, really do have to read through, and they go through layers in the process, right? So they're read by an initial reader that is usually then sent to a second reader. Sometimes it's sent to a small committee, sometimes it's sent to a big committee. That person may send it back to another reader. It may go to another. There's some, we have some special programs at Barnard, so it may go to that special program group, where it may also be read by a faculty member. So there's a lot of touch points on them. Okay. Yes, in the back.
Hi, thank you, first of all. What would you say, what's your perspective on getting an applicant from a student who is in the first year of a new high school?
That's an excellent question. Somebody emailed me the other night, an old friend, and said, my son is choosing between this high school, which I know, and this new high school. What do I do? Like, oh my gosh, I don't know that high school at all. And so, you know, there are risks that we take in choosing a new place. But I think that you're going to go to you want to see what kind of curriculum is being offered, right? This particular school was offering an IB curriculum. And so that's a packaged curriculum that schools buy into. And so in that package, it's an excellent curriculum. So like there's a layer there right there that I felt like, okay, we know what kind of curriculum that student's going to have, and it's going to involve a lot of writing and particular kinds of classes. But I think it's going to information sessions, you know, and choosing that school to hear from the administration and hear from the school. For us, there have always been years where I'll be reviewing an application and it is from a school that either I know nothing about or it's a new high school. And there is that moment. I remember there's a school that now we've been working with the school for 20 years. I remember the day that's so long, that was a new school, and it was the first year of that school. And I spent a lot of time talking to their head of school to understand their curriculum before I read those applications. You know, not most schools can't do that. And so we try our best to understand the schools, but yeah, I mean, there are good risks that one can take in this process. And I think, you know, do your own research, and it doesn't mean that when they start that high school, they have to stay there, right? If it's not working out, one can hopefully change the school. But there are a lot of schools that have come into play in the last 10 years or so. And you know, we do our research and you'll do your research as well. So, but we've had good success with so many of them too. Okay, one more, then we got to stop. Let's go.
I have a granddaughter who would be coming from a state where sports is quite important and would be interested in playing competitively at Barnard and Columbia, I guess, combined.
Yep.
How does that fit into the application?
Yeah, so no, that's an excellent question. And if any of you do have to get up and leave, I totally get it, because the state of the college is not starting down the way there. So Barnard is in a very unique position. You know, when we went, when Columbia went co-ed, we were, it was negotiated that we then joined the Columbia Athletic Consortium. So it's this Barnard Columbia Athletic Consortium. So we're the only all-women's college, only liberal arts college to be participating in Division I Ivy athletics. So we offer 16 different sports at the very high level of play. We get a lot of students who apply to Barnard and say, I'm good, but I'm not that good. And so we do offer intramurals and club sports here as well. But there are some students who are at a very high level of play and do want to be on a very competitive team. So the coaches at Columbia are recruiting both for Barnard and Columbia. So we have a liaison in our office. They could either contact our office and say, hey, I'm really interested in playing soccer. We'll connect them with a coach, or they might contact a coach directly and say, either I'm interested in playing for Columbia, and the coach will say, oh, well, there's two options that you have. You could look at Barnard and Columbia as schools, or they may say, I'm already looking at Barnard, so there is a recruitment process in the application. Or the admissions office is doing the admitting, the coaches are not. The coaches are recommending to the admissions office, but ultimately we're making the final decisions.
You would be aware of it.
Yes, but we would be aware of recruited athletes. Yes. All right. We have to end, but thank you all so much. It's been